Content advisory warning. This video is about the demon lord Yeenoghu, the demon beast of butchery. Those uncomfortable with fantasy violence, torture, mutilation, suicide, slavery and rape, this is your red card. Do not view this video. Stop now. Yeenoghu is extremely nasty. This is your only warning. Hello everybody, my name is AJ Pickett. This is the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make lots of videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore, the history of monsters and masterminds, exotic locations, and excellent resources for role-playing gamers. In my quest to bring all of the best lore to you and cover as much as I can about the Outer Planes, the D&D multiverse, the planet Toril, and the cosmic forces of good and evil, including the hordes of the Abyss, I have playlists for all the demons and demon lords as I cover them one by one. So, sit back, grab a beverage, we're about to get deeply nerdy. One of the original demon lords created by Gary Gygax for the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game, Yeenoghu has always been one of the most powerful and most notorious, feared by demons who are capable of feeling that emotion, and justifiably so. Among the population of rank and foul creatures that exists only to destroy the multiverse as it is, Yeenoghu is on a whole other playing field of sadistic violence for its own sake. He's not just a lord of demons, he is a consort of death itself. Not only is he the original source of the Gnoll species, worshipped by the majority of them as the creator god, he has also, for a very long time, been a lord of all of the ghouls, after he subjugated their demon prince, Dorazane. But as of late, he's lost control over Dorazane and the ghouls, not that he cares much. Some Gnolls have broken away from the savage cult, and a couple of Gnoll gods have sprung up over the tens of thousands of years of their existence, such as Gnoll, king of the hyenas, and RedNZblue, goddess of fear. But the truth is, when Gnolls first gained the ability to think and feel outside of their constant bloodlust and quest for violence, they looked for meaning in the world around them, and like all primitive races, created a pantheon of their own, sometimes borrowing mythology from other races to fill the gaps. But there was never a solid mythology to hold the pantheon together. The Gnolls are typically a nomadic and brutal race with no storytelling and certainly no literature, and with the constant call to turn to Yeenoghu singing in their blood, the prayers to other gods soon died on their lips, so often pulled back from fangs frothing with the blood and gore of their victims. Gnoll and RedNZblue are thus marginal gods at best, barely even a lesser power. Nonetheless, they can and do grant Gnolls divine spells when called on to do so, as it's their only hope of retaining what little power they have. Certainly they are and never have been any sort of threat to Yeenoghu, and they would be extremely foolish to even try. All Gnolls know in their hearts that theirs was a horrific genesis, born from starving hyenas who gorged on the corrupted flesh of a demon horde's victims in the ancient past, when Yeenoghu somehow walked on the surface of the world of the prime material plane. In his wake, from the shrieking and violently mutating hyena scavengers, diseased and wretched were born the first Gnolls. At first nothing more than rampaging mutants, little better than the demons who flocked to Yeenoghu's side, but when he departed the Prime and returned to the Abyss, the Gnolls remained, and were able to see past the fury and red haze of their bloodlust, becoming more like the sapient species we know today. Even so, they have more in common with tieflings and cambions than any normal mortal creature, as demonic corruption still runs in their veins and taints their flesh and thoughts. Gnolls have been present on the world of Toril since well before the rise of elves and dwarves and humans. They were around when dragons and giants were fighting it out across the entire continent of Faerun, serving as disposable raiders by the more despicable warlords on either side of the conflict, fighting against other members of their own species as often as not. But then, Gnolls have never seen the wisdom of avoiding fighting among their own kind. Far from it. When left to their own devices, they engage in more bloodshed with each other than even the resource-starved and overpopulated lands of the Orcs. When Yeenoghu first got mentioned in Dungeons & Dragons, he was originally associated with Orcs, but not anymore. A bit of a refresher on the Gnoll species, as to know them is to know a little bit more about Yeenoghu himself, in a way. Gnolls have greenish-grey skin and brown fur. Their eyes are dull black and their long nails are amber-coloured. They wear armour made from bone, tusk, horn, metal and leather. Their garments are often shabby, soiled, ragged and infested. Female Gnolls give birth to 2 to 4 pups about 6 months after conception. They reach adolescence in 2 years and seldom live longer than 35 years, yet adults stand over 7 feet tall. Living in bands of over 100 individuals ruled by the most dominant and ruthless bully, typically female, though it's very hard to tell the genders apart. Most of the time gnolls are subterranean, or they camp in ruined buildings and raided villages. They keep slaves who perform the manual labour the gnolls hate to do. They also associate it with trolls and keep packs of hyenas. Gnolls dominate their hunting area by sheer numbers, strength, fear and intimidation. They dislike goblins, kobolds, giants, humans and demi-humans. They eat warm-blooded creatures and don't particularly care what sort. They prefer the ones that scream though. They will hunt an area until it's ruined. They then move on, thus they tend to not leave any survivors. They will hunt and kill any living creature they can find. Gnoll tradition insists on an exchange of gifts whenever members of different tribes meet, if they're on peaceful terms. They are supposed to say, "I welcome you, tooth brother or sister." Situations that frighten gnolls are believed to be tests from the goddess Refnara. They make sacrifices to her on the full moon so she will bite chunks out of the moon to bring back the darkness. Gnolls hate the full moon. They avoid hunting under its light. Gnolls pound on the ground with feet and bones and dance by hopping. They then play a game where a gnoll in the band is blindfolded and slapped and kicked and barked at until it can wrestle another gnoll to the ground, who is then grabbed and blindfolded by the others, and so on. Gnolls who are hungry revert to savage instincts and their social structure tends to fall apart very quickly. Flins are more solid and muscular gnolls, seen as gifted with demon strength by Yeenoghu. The Flins are clever tacticians who serve as leaders or elite hunters. They have no great love for their lesser cousins and often treat them as little more than cannon fodder. There's more to the Gnoll race and I'll be making an updated video on them soon. In the original Manual of the Plains, author Jeff Grubb gave us a brief glimpse into the multiple abyssal layers that Yeenoghu was claiming as his territory at the time. One, a vast barren realm of salted earth, mostly flat and desolate, with a massive fortress actually hauled along by thousands and thousands of tormented slaves, constantly whipped and abused by legions of Yeenoghu's chosen overseers. The death toll there is astonishing, with new victims arriving constantly to feed the fortress with fresh meat. Adding to this is what goes on inside the fortress, no less murderous, and added yet more broken and mutilated corpses to the thick roadway of blood and gore that the fortress lays down in its wake, soaking the barren plain with blood, greedily snapped up and slurped up by the predatory lifeforms that inhabit this stark place. No matter what layer of the abyss Yeenoghu rules, one thing is fairly constant. Whatever ecology does exist there is transformed into one based entirely on predatory survival. The hunters are in turn hunted. Everything, even the plants, kill and eat any other creature they can to survive. Parasitic wasps and grubs swarm in the air and writhe in the soil, and corpses of animals and plants. Thorn-covered, toxic plants whip tendrils and vines which grow over and choke the unwary in their sleep. Land-based giant mollusks snap close razor-sharp shells to amputate and digest limbs. Swarms of vermin dig burrows that collapse under the weight of other creatures, creating feeding pits that strip flesh from bone like a school of piranha. The Planescape sourcebook on Hallowed Ground would later define one such realm he ruled as the 422nd layer, the Seeping Woods, part of a larger realm. To quote the article on Yeenoghu from Dragon Magazine number 364, published June 2008, written by Robert J. Swalb, and with illustrations by Jason A. Engel and Brian Hagen featured in this video as well. Yeenoghu faded from the game for a time during the early years of 2nd edition. In 1992 he returned to the game as Carl Sargent's Monster Mythology was published. Here Yeenoghu remained a demon lord and had become a full-fledged god and member of the giantish pantheon. Deemed an interloper god, he was not originally part of that pantheon obviously, but he joined it later when he subverted the gnolls from their god Gorlick. This was where we run into a contradiction in mythology. As in many other sources, Gorlick never was the creator god of the gnolls. Yeenoghu most certainly was and is the origin of the species. Such is the twisting and reworking of history to fit certain goals and altering perception and belief, and another example of how you just can't take religious doctrines as historical fact in Dungeons & Dragons lore. Yeenoghu remained a part of the giant pantheon, in part, but he cared nothing for the giants themselves. He just sought the power he could steal from them, as he had from fallen Gorlick. With 3rd edition, Yeenoghu's significance began to fade again. Although he was still favoured by the gnolls, he was no longer their principal god. The coup de grace, so to speak, for Yeenoghu was the loss of Dorazane, the king of the ghouls. Libris Mortis, the sourcebook by Andy Collins and Bruce Cordell, revealed Yeenoghu lost the ability to command Dorazane, implying either the king of ghouls had ascended to true godhood finally, thanks to events on other planes of existence spilling over into the wider multiverse, which his rank as demigod supported, or that Yeenoghu lost so much power through a similar reverse process, probably because his followers on various worlds were wiped out in various raids and wars. He was fast becoming irrelevant. Fiendish Codex 1 Hordes of the Abyss by Ed Stark, James Jacobs and Eric Mona confirms the latter explanation, describing the Destroyer as a lesser demon lord, with few ambitions beyond seeing his chosen servants free to continue their mayhem and murder across the material plane. Even Wolfgang Bauer's and Gwendolyn F.M. Kestrel's Expedition to the Demon-Weird Pits adventure portrays Yeenoghu as a minor player in the demonic conclave, his attendance diminished by his peers. In the 4th edition rules, Yeenoghu is again one of the few demon lords mentioned in the monster manual. The Beast of Butchery is the sole master of the Gnolls, and packs of these feral creatures roam the world in search of raid plunder and victims to sacrifice on bloody altars. Yeenoghu is still a savage and bestial figure, but he has reclaimed his place among the mightiest of the demon lords. It's just a matter of time before the Beast of Butchery stirs in his fetid realm and brings horrific war to the plains once more. And if you've been paying attention to more recent developments and my videos on the dragons and the giants, it seems brutal warfare and chaos in which Gnolls certainly thrive is once more fast approaching the world of Toril, at least, and probably many other worlds. A fact not lost on Yeenoghu, who is probably doing the Demon Lord equivalent of leaning forward on the edge of his seat, moving his champions and his savage minions in any way he can to ensure the dragons and giants erupt into all-out warfare once more. The Demon Lord of Slaughter is poised and ready to let loose the dogs of war. Currently, Yeenoghu ranks about number 3 in the most powerful demon lords under Demogorgon and Orcus. As he has been recently detailed in Out of the Abyss Adventure sourcebook for 5th edition, he's still a chaotic hunter and ruler of Gnolls, and is engaged in a full-on conflict with one of his most ancient adversaries, Baphomet, the Horned King, Prince of Beasts and the Demon Lord of Minotaurs. It's not completely beyond possibility that at the end of however long this savage conflict wages, Yeenoghu may take the rulership of all Minotaurs from Baphomet and rise again to the rank of a god, as he was once as he ruled the ghouls as well as the Gnolls. So let's take a more detailed look at the cult of Yeenoghu, their practices and activities, and the nature of this horrendous force of evil in the multiverse. For this, I'll be quoting directly from Dragon issue number 364, as it has an excellent information on all of this. Yeenoghu has few ambitions beyond the visceral thrill of rending the soft flesh of his enemies and drinking deep the hot blood from their bodies. He craves nothing more than the utter defeat of all those who stand against him, and is relentless in his pursuit of feeding the emptiness of his existence with the frantic screams of those he slays. Butchery is the provender of Yeenoghu, and his single-minded pursuit of annihilation makes him a dangerous force, even in the infinite layers of the abyss. Yeenoghu combines the worst features of a Gnoll and a demon in one immense form, standing at least 12 feet tall, but often swelling to great heights. His body is gaunt and lanky, and patches of yellow fur stained with brown spots cover him. Leprous grey skin and suppurating wounds mar his body, revealing the corruption of his flesh and spirit. His head is a large anthropomorphic hyena with glowing red eyes and a toothy maw from which spills strings of drool. Always suspicious of treachery, Yeenoghu wears armour assembled from the pieces he scavenges on the battlefield, with bits of mail and plate armour strapped together with bits of flesh collected from his victims. His pride is his triple flail, an evil weapon constructed from the bones of a god he slew during the ancient wars between the deities and the primordials. The handle is a thigh bone wrapped in the god's torn flesh. 3 chains extend from the top of the handle, each ending in a rusty barbed head. When used in combat, the weapon bleeds divine ichor, still, splashing the field with tears and the blood of a fallen deity. This weapon has the ghoulish quality of causing paralysis in those it strikes, as well as stripping the flesh from their shattered bones in great spatters and gouts of blood and gore. Yeenoghu moves with relentless speed across any battlefield, charging into the rank-and-file masses, creating a tornado of murder that forms an actual flood of blood, raining entrails and body parts down like hailstones from a storm cloud of gore. When Yeenoghu opens his mouth and speaks on the battlefield, his words are in the dark speech of the evil primordial, uttering words of unmaking that rot and erode every living creature in range with ongoing necrotic damage, a tactic that, like Demogorgon, has earned him the title Destroyer. Much like any other demon lord, Yeenoghu draws the demon hordes to himself like moths to a flame. They crave the brutal power that Yeenoghu releases in his rampaging battles and soak up the torment of his victims, as well as feeding greedily on the released demonic energy as thousands of demons, lesser and greater alike, fall in combat, so that as they are mowed down, ever more demons flock to replace them, and the potent overload of demonic essence only serves to destabilize and corrupt the environment faster, making it easier for lethal spawning pits to form, pouring ever-increasing numbers of demonic forms into existence. It would be a horrific spectacle to see Yeenoghu shout out words of unmaking, obliterate everything around him, only to have that surge of destruction and murder cause the demon horde around him to visibly swell and bulk up like the Hulk gains more power and size from his rage. It's easy to see how a force like that, once fully engaged with opposed forces or just in a target-rich environment, becomes an almost unstoppable tide of death. But even Yeenoghu is not always fighting massive wars, so what does he do in his downtime, deep within his massive stone-wheeled fortress raining blood and filth in its wake? When not leading one of his endless battles or partaking in torturous sacrifices, he likes to relax in his massive harem, a motley array of races and creatures whose members constantly fluctuate as Yeenoghu acquires new ones and loses old ones. Those who don't commit suicide die of some disease or get murdered by their fellows to stay alive, and tend to get either raped to death, killed for the hell of it, or end up being eaten when Yeenoghu grows bored or hungry. Yeenoghu's realm is filled with despicable creatures, from packs of feral demonic gnolls to a bevy of cackling demons and bestial fiends, from the remnants of ghouls infesting his mountains to the noxious creepers lurking in the depths of the seeping woods. Yeenoghu's realm is unique in its ability to spawn new embodiments of cruel and savage monsters. By far the most numerous of Yeenoghu's minions are those gnolls who abandon the middle world and find new lives serving Yeenoghu in his realm. The gnoll packs are ubiquitous throughout the Dun Savannah, thinning near the shores of the Curse Wallow, though they dwell near any shrines or temples of their evil master. Demons in all their forms and shapes make up a close second to the gnolls' teeming numbers, though most monstrous and unpredictable of demonkind call this layer home. Hordes of Evistros claw and fight with each other and anything else they can encounter, while Balglura demons move across the plains, smashing and killing as they go. Vroks roost in the mountain peaks or circle the twisted towers of the few permanent settlements on the layer. Although Dorazane no longer is subject to Yeenoghu's rule, ghouls and abyssal ghouls still lurk in the defiles and slopes of the screaming peaks. The ghouls aren't loyal to Yeenoghu, but they have severed themselves from the king of ghouls, making them an unpredictable lot. From time to time, Yeenoghu has had success in rousing these undead servants, but more often than not, the demonic ghouls prey on the destroyer's other minions, after descending from their mountain lairs in white-painted tide to crush the Gnoll tribes. While most Gnolls find their lives cut astonishingly short for the beast of butchery, a few claw their way to the top of his armies. Just a handful of Gnoll champions ever fight their way free from the sea of violence to gain positions as commanders and advisors. In addition, Yeenoghu keeps a number of courtesans to ravish, kill, and sometimes eat. His insatiable lover and stalwart servant is a filthy gnoll named Rekla, lording over the mix of races and creatures. Yeenoghu has few allies in the Abyss, obviously. None of his peers trust him, and few respect him. Yeenoghu does have his uses, however, and Grast has manoeuvred the Beast of Butchery into terrible battles with surgical precision and great cost of Yeenoghu's own forces. Whether Yeenoghu realises he's being used or not isn't certain, but it doesn't matter since the Prince of Ghouls needs no excuse to kill. Yeenoghu deals with lesser fiends, forming alliances when doing so suits his moods. Such arrangements last only as long as Yeenoghu can stomach them, and they always end in bloody murder, with his allies' entrails spilled to the floor of the Destroyer's palace. In spite of the risks, ambitious fiends seek out the ruler of Ruin to enlist his service. Some in the hopes of gaining power and status, others plotting to overthrow the savage demon lord and claim his domains for themselves. Such demons might be selected to serve as exarches for a time, but rare is it that the demons that can escape this Yeenoghu's dark wrath. Yeenoghu's cultists in the prime material plane feed his abyssal layers with a steady supply of slaves and victims from hundreds of worlds. His altars run red with the blood of fresh sacrifices. He hungers for vengeance against those who have defeated or thwarted him in the past, and his cultists crave the chance to destroy his enemies. But the centuries of warfare have taught him the value of cunning. Rather than spend his servants in a useless bid to seize the abyss en masse, Yeenoghu turns his attention to his servants in the natural world. There he works to empower the Gnolls and other cultists, giving them the strength they need to conquer the whole of the civilized lands and make the world his own. Such a conquest would make him more powerful than any god, and thus enable him to mount an unstoppable assault against his enemies, the whole of the abyss, and one day, the entire cosmos. The greatest concentration of Yeenoghu's mortal servants comes from the Gnoll tribes in the worlds. To them, Yeenoghu is their god and master. The beast of butchery was not always worshipped by the Gnolls, for long ago these desperate tribes paid homage to a now almost forgotten name. Some cultists claim that Gorlick was murdered by Yeenoghu during the ancient wars between the primordials and the gods, and that his mace is actually made from Gorlick's thigh, Yeenoghu having absorbed the fallen god's essence and laid claim to his children forever, after staining the race with his own foul corruption. It's just one of the twisted mythologies. Not all Yeenoghu's worshippers are Gnolls, though. Any creature capable of embracing the beast within, who exults in killing, butchering and slaughter, can find a common purpose with this terrifying patron. Most non-Gnoll servants operate alone, performing obscene rituals in the light of the moon and eating the flesh of their living victims raw. A group of like-minded fanatics might gather and establish a small murder cult, but they soon draw attention since their violent crimes escalate when gathered in groups. Yeenoghu is never selective about those he accepts in his cult and has, at best, a mild interest in his servants' affairs. Indeed, many of his servants don't even realise whom they truly worship. The ceremonies are the same, involving the slow torture of their victims culminating in devouring their living flesh. Regular blood sacrifices in moonlight and the unflinching commitment to slaughtering one's enemies. Among Gnoll tribes, worship follows certain customs and practices that vary from tribe to tribe quite a bit. As with the solitary servants, the cultists scour the lands for fresh victims, dragging them back to hidden altars where they are stripped down and mutilated with sharp knives. The blood is collected and distributed among Yeenoghu's high priests, which they then mix with hallucinogenic herbs and consume with relish, going into more of a murderous frenzy. Another common element is the refusalness of cleanliness. Any follower of the demons must never bathe and must bask in his own odours, rubbing excrement, blood and filth into his hide and vestments until he becomes a reeking heap, crawling with maggots and disease. The more pungent the stench, the greater the cultist's influence. Yeenoghu's cults are a chaotic mess. At their cores are cabals of vicious, treacherous leaders who gain their positions by murdering their predecessors in spectacular and gruesome ways. These leaders must contend with rising stars within their own ranks, butchering those showing too much promise and ambition. Thus, the actual number of leaders is small, with the rest of the cultists rounded out by the tribe, who are warriors for the most part. Yeenoghu has a presence in the world, but has few shrines and fewer temples. His holy sites are blood-stained rocks in dark corners of the wilderness. Some include a single jagged chunk of rock thrusting from the ground and scrawled with crude paintings and blistering curses smeared in blood and feces. When the cult performs a sacrifice, they hold the victim down on the altar while the leader carves off bits of flesh to give to the gathered host of warriors, or to abyssal maws, which are believed to feed the chunks of flesh directly to Yeenoghu's maw, which produces an incredible frenzy as the Gnolls fight and claw to receive the sacraments of their master or feed it to their god. The cultists save the viscera for last. Within these dripping organs they believe they can see visions of the future and commandments from Yeenoghu, so they're careful to inspect each glistening chunk for the secrets they contain. In Yeenoghu's realm, the beast of butchery enjoys a more formalized following, and each group works in one of 3 fortified cities marking the boundaries of his lair. These groups centre their activities around grand temples of crimson stone, massive 6-tiered 5-sided ziggurats, darkened by the profusion of flies hovering around the sites. On each side a broad staircase climbs to the zenith, while the tiers themselves hold gardens of screaming and weeping victims, each tortured and left to die slow deaths. The wreckage of all the races can be found here, from orcs nailed to X-shaped frames, to halflings dangling from hooked chains, to wicked cages filled with long barbs facing inward to penetrate the flesh of dwarves, humans and gnolls who occupy them. Each day, sometime after dawn, Yeenoghu's cultist leaders select a victim from those on display. They draw forth their prey from the contraptions, drag them up the steps to the bloody altar at the top and promptly butcher them, tossing the bits of meat to rain down on the victims waiting for their turn at the top. There is a very good chance that player characters captured by a cult will be physically transported to Yeenoghu's realm. I certainly encourage this sort of exile over just being murdered and having to roll up a new character, which just sucks. Rather, turn the adventure into a tour of one of the worst locations in the multiverse in a desperate bid to escape somehow. The whole realm of Yeenoghu, in a way, will be almost steering the player characters into a course of action that requires not only they murder other beings in order to escape, but to enjoy killing their victims and twisting their souls a little bit closer to outright evil. And if they are evil by the end of it, so much easier it is for them to escape back to the world to spread more evil. I'll quote directly from the Dragon article as it talks about the specifics of this realm. Yeenoghu's realm is a dire place that has all the nastiest elements of the abyss combined into one region of depthless evil, cruelty and wanton destruction. For all the creatures dwelling in the realm, the layer feels empty. Great stretches of savanna lay undisturbed except for the hot wind blowing over the Curse Swallows to the east, a shallow and foul sea. The mountains are still and quiet until pierced by the occasional shriek of the dying, torn apart by ghouls. Even in the vibrant forests of the seeping woods, nothing stirs. Quiet and still, waiting for predators. At night, the lair comes alive when the hunters emerge from hidden grottos and filthy encampments to hunt. The screams of the slain, wet, tearing noises and the grunts and clashes of combat sound out, and the lair is pregnant with the coppery smell of spilt blood. Yeenoghu's realm consists of 5 broad regions, and all are more or less ruled by the Destroyer. By far the largest is the Dun Savanna, an endless sea of dead grasses punctuated by isolated strands of gnarled trees and dimpled with pools of brackish water. Here the gnolls run the wildest. The savanna extends north to the foothills of the screaming peaks, a jagged range of mountains clawing at the leprous skies. Little more than sharp rocks, slides and scree, the mountains were once home to the realm controlled by the King of Ghouls. Even as in his absence, having moved on, it remains a dangerous place due to all of the undead dwelling here, thriving in the dark and shadows. The mountains give way to a great expanse of salt wastes, stretching as far as the eye can see. Little lives on these lands. Tough packs of ravenous ghouls or twisted demonic constructs can survive in these inhospitable wastes. Rumours hold that this barren landscape marks the fall of a powerful champion of the gods. In the deepest depths, in the black sea of death, rest the remains of the murdered champion, and the salt of the lands are in fact the dried tears of deities who mourned his passing. The eastern extent of Yeenoghu's realm is a yellow sea known as the Curse Swallow. Since the waters are, in fact, poisonous, few gnolls roam its shores, and many, in fact, keep their distance because all sorts of terrible creatures lurk just beneath the surface of the ochre-coloured water. The Curse Swallow is a haven for sorts that escape the beast of butchery. Flotillas of refugees, exiles and rebels sail the seas. Foremost of these fleets is one commanded by the Cannibal King, a ruthless human rogue who captains the Harvester. He and his crew press gang sailors to replace their fallen comrades and to serve as food for when their stores grow thin, which they often do. The Cannibal King seems content to remain on the Curse Swallow, but when he does brave the deeper waters, his fleet often returns swollen with a fresh crop of rotted hulks choked with depraved sailors. Finally, to the west lies the Seeping Woods. As mentioned, by many accounts this forest is infinite and spreads beyond Yeenoghu's lair. Here the gnarled trees grow tall, blotting out the sun with a tangled canopy of vines and yellow leaves. The splitting bark drips green sap stinking of rot. Crawling through the shadows are armies of toxic insects, slithering serpents and poisonous plants. This Seeping Woods is by name under the control of Yeenoghu, but the Destroyer has had little luck in maintaining a standing presence here because the forest just rebels at intrusions and gobbles up any of those who linger over long, so it's not really ruled by anyone, mainly just bordered by them. Yeenoghu's realm is mostly untamed and savage wilderness anyway, though few settlements have survived in spite of this near-constant violence. Tiny logging settlements are scattered throughout the Seeping Woods, each harvesting wood and other materials to supply Yeenoghu's war machines. These encampments never last long and soon vanish after they are first established, as the workers are just picked off one by one. The cost in terms of labour is extremely high as lives are lost, but as the sole source of timber on the layer, new settlements arise each month. 3 permanent cities are also in Yeenoghu's realm. The least of these is Vujac, a small city compared to the others. It serves as a mustering place to mount new expeditions into the Seeping Woods. Gnoll and demon overseers round up volunteers and dispatch them into the forest armed with axes and dire threats. As long as timber comes out of the woods, their masters care nothing for what goes on in these darkened lands. Vujac Sesko controls the northern extent of the realm. Behind its 300-foot tall walls, Gnolls, humans, and a bevy of other races toil for Yeenoghu, mining the mountains of iron and other metals in which they fashion the weapons of war. Corpses litter the streets, left where they have fallen to be worried by jackals and hyenas, brazenly stalking the streets. Vujac Kesk is the seat of Yeenoghu's cult, his headquarters of his faith. Here, his most fervent followers gather to perform awful rites and ceremonies in the name of their master. Blood pits serve to challenge new champions, pitting them against blooded gnolls, ogres, and others so that the weak are winnowed out and the strong are tempered. Vujac Kesk is also the point where Yeenoghu gathers his armies to march through the western gathering gate, a strange anomaly tying the realm to numerous other worlds and planes. Yeenoghu disdains these cities, preferring instead to relax in the stinking throne room of his roiling fortress surrounded by his desperate and suicidal orgy. Standing over 600 feet tall, ringed by a half-dozen walls and packed with buildings separated by tiny narrow streets, the entire structure weeps blood and effluvia from its gutters, and a pall of smoke swirls about it. Demons and slaves labour to pull the monstrosity while rocks circle about, cackling as they drop, to feast on those crushed beneath its wheels. The fortress makes a circuit through the plain once every year to remind the denizens of the realm who truly rules here. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.